Ordinary citizens in Iran were still reeling from the crackdown on the 2022 Women Life Freedom movement. Now it's all about hunkering down as best one can. Nearly 700 killed in Iran since last Friday, according to the human rights activists of HRANA, with citizens bracing for more and scenes that hark back to the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s. How do those who defied the regime just a couple of years ago feel about this moment and about those who are cheerleading for regime change from abroad? On that score, the command in Tehran, closely watching for signs of internal dissent, will ask about arrests, internet disruptions, calls to stop using WhatsApp, and reaction to Israel's brief hacking of state television Wednesday evening. Note that while Donald Trump employs the collective we, as in we now have complete and total control of the skies over Iran, Israel's Iron Dome, unable to stop missiles like the one that hit Bersheeba hospital in the south of the country. If the United States is all in, that won't be a first, by the way. Iran's collective memory goes further back further than 1979, back even to 1953, and that CIA-backed coup that overthrew a democracy in favor of the Shah. Fast forward to the present. Will Iranians rally round the flag, or will they rise up? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking, what do Iranian citizens want? Joining us from Washington, Iranian-American journalist Nagar Mortazavi, senior fellow at the Center for International Policy. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
From London, Elie Geranmaye, Deputy Director of the Middle East North Africa Program at the European Council on Foreign Relations think tank. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be with you.
His books include Nixon, Kissinger, and the Shah, the United States and Iran in the Cold War. Roham Alvandi is director of the Iranian History Initiative at the London School of Economics. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you.
And we're also in the presence of Kian Habibian, a co-founder of We Are Iranian Students. Thanks for being with us. You can, by the way, always listen. That's right, listen to the France 24 debate wherever podcasts are streamed. Before we go to our all-Iranian panel, an inside look from our partners at state broadcaster France Télévisions. They spoke to ordinary citizens who shared their images. It's a report read by Selena Sykes.
These images were filmed by a student on Monday afternoon. Caught off guard by missiles while walking home from doing groceries. Full of panic, her hands with her house keys are shaking as she enters the building. But she has avoided the worst. Narges has decided to leave Tehran. In order to protect her identity, we have hidden her face.
من اصلا واقعا نمیدونم باید جمع کنم برم کجا برم فقط دارم همینطوری ساکن جمع میکنم حتی واقعا نمیدونم کجا باید برم همه راه ها بسته است همه خیابون ها خلوته هیچ ماشینی گیر نمیاد نه اسنپ گیر میاد نه تپسی گیر میاد مترو خطرناک.
She captured these images overnight from her window. In a nearby neighborhood, a few anti-regime slogans can be heard. The Ayatollah are considered by some as responsible for the Israeli missiles. Many cries are heard from balcony to balcony, but no one shows their face, out of fear of the repercussions. Narges, too, is against the Iranian regime's repression. She refuses to wear a hijab, but today her fear is stronger than her convictions.
تا همین یکی دو هفته پیش داشتیم ما این دست و پنجه رو هم میکردیم که اگر اسنپ گرفتیم چه نکات امنیتی رو رعایت کنیم که شانس بیاریم رانندمون قاتل نباشه که به خاطر موهامون بکشدمون بعد یهو میان میگن که خب اوکی قرار بمب بزنیم قرار موشک بزنیم قرار بمیریم.
At the foot of her building, shops are closed and the streets are deserted. Elsewhere, there are huge queues for petrol. This family is leaving Tehran to take refuge in the south of the country. These two women are in tears. There are huge traffic jams as people try to flee the capital.
دوستان اینجا رو زدن دودشون.
A few moments earlier, there was a difficult goodbye with the rest of the family. The grandparents refused to leave Tehran. This child is too scared to leave the apartment. Those who are leaving are desperately trying to find petrol.
اطراف ما رو سمت نارمک خیلی بمبارون کردن، موشک بارون کردن. الان بچه‌ها باز اومدن خیلی گریه کردن، ترسیده بودن، گفتن همه جا رو بمبارون کردن و مسیرایی که سمت خونه ماه.
The family is heading to Darak, a town further south. The journey is usually 3.5 hours by car. Stuck in traffic jams, now far from bombs and missiles, it took the family 14 hours. They arrive at dawn, but no housing is available, as the quiet town is overrun with people from Tehran.
الان 2-3 ساعت هم هست که تو خود عراق داریم میگردیم که فقط یه جایی پیدا کنیم که بریم. الان گرفته بودیم، کرده بودیم ولی خب
The Iranian population is going through conflicting emotions. Anger against Israel, but some also feel relief after the deaths of certain regime leaders.
Kian Habibian, that report was filmed earlier in the week and edited then here in Paris. Your reaction to all those who are trying to get out of the capital, especially after that evacuation order?
Well, this report shows exactly how the population is suffering from these two fires that exist for the population right now. From one side, we have the Islamic Republic, who has been repressing the population for the past 46 years. They didn't hesitate to shut down the internet to kill 1,500 people at least in 2019. They've actually shot missiles at a civilian airplane. And on the other side, we have another government, a criminal government, who has a mandate for war crimes by the ICC. And people are stuck there and they feel worried because, as you can see, they don't know where to go. When we talk about Tehran, we talk about 9 million people living there. They have no idea where to go. They have a limited access to gas and no shelter. And up to this day, still no communication from the regime towards the people on how to take shelter, how to take care of themselves.
Negar Mortazavi, the United States, like France, home to a sizable Iranian diaspora and a sizable links with Israel as well. Your thoughts on how it's being viewed, the war, how it's being viewed where you are, and how your reaction to what we saw in that report?
I agree with Kian. I mean, most people I speak to on the ground who are not necessarily fans of their own government or the status quo and have been very angry at sort of the domestic repression that's happened to them in the past. Kian had great examples. We can go back 40 years. Now feel like they're stuck between literally a rock and a hard place because the freedom bombs that were promised are also coming down on people's homes. Even when a nuclear scientist or a military commander is assassinated in their home, supposedly in these quote-unquote targeted strikes, first of all, these people were at home sleeping with their own families, women and children. And the apartments around them, now we're seeing actual images coming out, are also impacted. There were buildings who've been completely flattened, or apartment buildings where you've seen dozens of people who were killed or injured in these supposedly targeted strikes, car bombs going off on the street, which if it was done by sort of a US foe or enemy, it would immediately be called terrorism. I don't know why we're not seeing a rush to do that. And so this sort of notion that this is an attack on Iran's nuclear program, or this is just an attack on the government or regime officials, the top brass, etc., the people on the ground are seeing that it's false. And as your report also showed, I also wanted to congratulate you, Francois, for having an Iranian panel and then also having reporting on the ground. Very few Western global outlets have this access or are willing to go out of their way to show really the plight of civilians, which I see being really ignored or not as much covered when we're looking at this two-sided conflict. So anyways, I have yet to talk to anyone on the ground who's happy about bombs coming down on people's homes. Again, the evacuation order through social media of a metropolis of nearly 10 million people, women, children, disabled, sick people. Where are they supposed to go? How are they supposed to get out of the city? I spoke to family members who had to wait in gas station lines for hours just to fill up a tank, get in their car, get out of the city, wait in congested traffic for hours and hours. And these are the lucky people who have cars, who have access to places outside Tehran, family, homes. Not everyone has this privilege. Not everyone can evacuate a metropolis of 10 million people.
Eli Garan-Maye, there was a moment in that report where the young woman who was beginning, we saw, who's scared and who's packing her stuff, she says the Tehran metro is not safe. Why does she say that?
Well, first of all, let me just emphasize the degree of resilience we're seeing from people on the ground is astounding. As everyone knows, there is an extremely difficult repressive condition on the ground, plus this sense, and this goes to your question, this sense that the security apparatus across the country has failed to protect them adequately. So when the evacuation orders, which are really unprecedented for a city like Tehran of almost 10 million people, coming from the mouth of the US president, and the Iranians are faced with basically no real shelters. This is not a country like Israel where it's civilians, which, by the way, we should note there have been civilian deaths on the Israeli side, unfortunately, as well. And the numbers are growing. But civilians in Israel have a government that has prepared for wars. They have shelters, they have bunkers. And in a city like Tehran, you just don't have that. And so there is this fear that nowhere really is safe, especially, I think, now that this war with Iran comes on the back of what we have seen Israel capable and willing to do in places like Lebanon and Gaza. There is a real panic and fear that Israel has carte blanche to do anything, and worryingly that it can do anything it wants because of the lack of the ability to provide security and protection from state security apparatus.
Israel's targets also drawing attention. It's not just nuclear sites or those trying to reach senior members of the regime. There was that targeting of state broadcaster IRIB earlier in the week. And then on Wednesday evening, hackers briefly pirating state television, displaying images from the Women Life Freedom movement. That was after said state television announced the hacking of banks.
We have witnessed a cyber attack targeting two of our banks, Bank Sepa and Bank Pasargad. I want to emphasize that the disruption occurred in the bank's operational systems and there has been no compromise in the storage of people's data. Therefore, the public can rest assured on that front. Our respected experts are diligently doing their work and, God willing, the issue will be resolved soon and the systems will be restored to their original state.
Apparently, there are Iranians locked out of their own accounts. Ron Alvandi, your thoughts on these hacks?
François, it's just the latest element of chaos and disorder that Iranians are having to deal with, not just because of the events of the last week, but the gradual decline of Iran from a normal, well-functioning country 40 years ago into an international pariah today. There are massive problems across the country, basic problems even before all of this bombing began. And there is a deep sense of anger and frustration amongst Iranians at how it could possibly be, how it could have possibly come to the point where a country of 90 million people is virtually defenseless against a small country of 10 million people. I mean, the population of Tehran alone is bigger than the population of Israel, and yet Iran's leaders have utterly failed to provide the most basic safety and security for Iranians, and have in fact provoked and manufactured a completely unnecessary conflict. Ordinary Iranians have no enmity for Israelis or Americans or anyone else for that matter. They just want to live in peace. They just want to live their normal lives. And they feel that they are being held hostage now by the Islamic Republic and are essentially stuck between Netanyahu's hawkish government and an Islamic Republic that's perfectly happy to sacrifice Iran's national interests on the altar of its ideology.
That view of no enmity for Americans and Israelis, does it change now with this bombing campaign?
I think the atmosphere and the mood right now is one of fear. Obviously, people are trying to scramble for safety. Tehran has emptied out. But I think that fear will give way more and more to anger. I think that anger will be directed primarily at the Islamic Republic for having dragged Iran into this horrendous situation. But if anybody thinks that in the midst of the country being under attack, that Iranians are going to somehow rise up and side with those who are responsible for the deaths of, so far we know, 240 Iranian civilians, then they're really delusional, because Iran's sense of nationalism is extremely strong. Iranians have been through much worse than this. They survived an 8-year war with Iraq in the 1980s. They've survived decades of sanctions, and they're not going to suddenly abandon their sense of national dignity and national sovereignty for the sake of Benjamin Netanyahu. So, but I think the anger is going to be primarily directed at their own leaders for having created and manufactured this completely unnecessary conflict between Iran and Israel.
Eli Geranmayeh, do you agree that this is a conflict manufactured by the Iranian regime?
Well, I mean, I think the immediate trigger and catalyst for why we've gotten here, in my view, is a decision by the current Israeli government to essentially scuttle the possibility of President Trump making a deal with Iran that would have severely curtailed its nuclear program. Of course, the reason why Iran has been boxed into this position, I think, is primarily rests with its own leadership. But under President Trump, there were 5 rounds of consecutive, quite back-to-back negotiations between the US and Iran, aimed at finding a diplomatic way to resolve this crisis. And, you know, for years, I have been arguing, as someone who's worked on this nuclear issue, that if this is not settled diplomatically, that unfortunately the choice that is facing Iran, Israel, and the United States possibly now is conflict, military conflict, and potentially an open-ended war. And we're here where we are. And I think the important thing is, and I think Iranians on the ground, I'm not sure how they will respond to this, but at least I know from speaking to European governments, there is now an intensified push together with countries in the Middle East to try and avert US entanglement in this conflict in a way that will essentially take us into more destruction and more death, not just in Iran, but also across the region as well.
Negar Mortazavi, yeah, there is, and Ellie's alluding it to it there. There's going to be a sit-down on Friday in Geneva between foreign ministers from Iran, France, Germany, the UK. There's been telephone conversations between said Iranian foreign minister and Steve Witkoff, the Donald Trump's main negotiator. But you know, how do Iranians view all of this? Because is this too little, too late, or is this all just a bit of theater? Seen from Washington, what's the feeling?
I don't think it's too late for off-ramps, and we saw this back in October and April when Israel and Iran had the tit-for-tat back and forth, which it was the first time in April actually for direct confrontation between the two after years of a shadow war. And back then, actually, the Biden administration drew a very clear red line for Benjamin Netanyahu that the U.S. will support them in defense, but not in offense when they attack Iran, because they didn't want to get pulled into a war with Iran. And also, I think the American public here is very important. Their view, poll after poll, has shown that there's no interest and appetite in the U.S. for another endless, regime change style war in the Middle East because of the failures of Iraq and Afghanistan. But the U.S. has not officially entered the offensive yet from Iran's viewpoint in their public messaging. They're still being careful. They consider the U.S. indirectly involved, implicit in the war. Of course, they're helping Israel in defense, but they haven't attacked Iran yet. And Iran has warned in the past also that if the U.S. does attack, they're going to attack U.S. interests, and there's plenty of targets across the region. And that will definitely be a major escalation. It will take the war to the next level. But we're not there yet. We know these plans are being discussed in the White House. President Trump is still skeptical. I think so far he has been outmaneuvered by Benjamin Netanyahu. Just 2 days before a round of nuclear talks, Israel goes and attacks Iran's nuclear program. It just makes no sense. But Benjamin Netanyahu did that. He's been wanting this war for the past 20 years very publicly. It's no secret to anybody. And he wanted the U.S. to start it. The U.S. didn't under multiple administrations. They didn't start the war. So now he started it, and he's hoping to drag the United States into it and then create sort of this big quagmire that he's been pushing for. But I think it's still not too late for off-ramps. The Europeans can play a very important role, as Ellie said, and this can quickly escalate, but it needs to also come with pressure from the U.S. because they're the party who has power and leverage over Israel.
As for ordinary Iranians, Roham Alvandi earlier mentioning how they've weathered worse during the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s. Back then, well, there was a front line. Here, it's for now exclusively an air campaign. Again, the human rights activist news agency has been compiling a daily update on localities, and this shows places that have been hit. Of course, we showed that report, Kian Habibian, at the outset that was mostly focused on Tehran, but other cities too have been targeted.
Yes, they have been targeted, and in the same way, the population has been targeted in every city. We were talking earlier about if the population is going to rally behind the Islamic Republic. It is too late to think about the population when you have killed them for the past 46 years. What do I mean by that? 2 hours before coming here, we've learned that Toumaj Salehi, the famous rapper, got arrested again. We've heard yesterday that 15 young girls have been arrested for tweeting online about the ongoing war. After the strikes, the sole focus of the Islamic Republic is its own population. we have seen the report you showed. We had to blur the pictures. Why do we have to blur the pictures? Because they threaten their own population. They don't care about it. We talk about Iran, but the Iranian population emphasizes on the fact that we are the Iranian civil society and that there is the Islamic Republic that has been leading all these policies for decades without taking into account what the Iranian population thinks. And today, because of the incompetence, the diabolical ideology of this regime, they are stuck and targeted everywhere. Yes, most of the strikes were in Tehran, indeed, but it's unsafe. We don't know where to go because there are no statements from the regime to the civilians. All they talk about is threatening the Israeli civil society. All they talk about is the survival of the Islamic Republic. All they talk about is the martyrs they have given after all this war and all this bombing. They didn't say a single word for the population yet.
Israel's operation began with, as well, the assassination of key commanders, pointing to perhaps a will, in any case, first of all, to have military superiority, but perhaps regime change. Among those killed was top military commander Mohammad Bagheri. Israel's prime minister stated that assassinating the supreme leader himself would quote, end it. Ali Khamenei, sworn in as president in 1981. He's been at the heart of Iranian politics basically since the revolution of '79. He's 86 years old now. Before he succeeded Ayatollah Khomeini in 1985. Wednesday, he had this warning for the United States in particular, and all those who might be thinking that assassination and regime change could be the way.
The Iranian nation firmly opposes an imposed war, just as it will firmly oppose an imposed peace. This nation will never surrender.
So there's two ways of looking at it, Roham Alvandi. This is a regime that's been under attack from the get-go. Is it when it's us versus them that it's actually the strongest?
I think this is the weakest that the Islamic Republic has ever been. It has invested itself in a policy of anti-Americanism, anti-Zionism, of meddling in the affairs of the Arab world to the detriment of the national interests of Iran. I mean, why should Iran and Israel have an antagonistic relationship when actually they have many common interests? So there is a sense, I think, particularly for me as a historian, that the Islamic Republic is reaching the end of its road. But what Netanyahu has done with this attack, if anything, is that he has breathed life into the regime. He has put Iranians in a position where they have to choose between the deaths of their loved ones or the national sovereignty of their country. And this is an impossible choice, for ordinary Iranians. A much wiser strategy would have been one similar to the one that the United States and the West pursued towards the Soviet Union during the Cold War, which was not one of overt military confrontation, but one of diplomacy combined with supporting those elements in Iran that want to take Iran in a democratic and secular direction.
Wasn't that the reproach that activists made against then U.S. President Barack Obama in 2009 when there were all those protests after a presidential election? This cautious, standoffish method, in the end, he was a bystander as the regime regained the upper hand.
Well, I think he himself, President Obama himself, now acknowledges that that was a mistake. and that was the wrong approach to take towards Iran. Look, the reality is that this regime for 46 years has been screaming death to America and death to Israel. We all remember President Ahmadinejad calling for Israel to be removed from the face of time. And combining those kinds of objectives with the building of a nuclear program, a secret one until 2012, is hardly going to lead to a warm and friendly relationship between Iran and the West. You know, a nuclear Iran is the stuff of nightmares in Washington and Jerusalem. So an astute Iranian foreign policy, one based on Iran's national interests, would not abandon Iran's nuclear ambitions, but would certainly not antagonize Israel and the United States for no reason other than some outdated and ridiculous ideology of anti-Americanism and anti-imperialism.
And do you agree with this, Elia Geran-Nayev?
There was a lot to unpack there, but look, I think we need to be forward-looking. We are where we are right now. So the question is, going forward, will Iran's ruling military and political establishment try and pivot towards a political off-ramp here? Because I think from the 6 days of bombardment that we have seen, it is clear that while Iran can inflict serious destruction, civilian death, and make life very painful for the Israeli public, it will not be able to match the military might of Israel and the United States, certainly not Israel and the United States combined. And so if Iran is indeed after the national interests of the country, its leaders will have to pivot, not just on the relationship abroad and foreign policy, but also they will have to move very quickly to repair a very damaged social contract between state and society. These two have to move in parallel. Right now, unfortunately, we are seeing the opposite in terms of hardening of positions at the moment, in terms of their foreign policy, especially in response to President Trump's call for unconditional surrender, which for any historian that has looked at the manner of Iran, not just under the Islamic Republic, but even under the Shah, they will know that Iran will never accept unconditional surrender without a fight. So this is the context they're operating in. And also on the domestic front, they are, instead of at the moment opening up the civil political space, shutting it down as in terms of a national security. So we'll have to see how the next 48 hours, which are, I think, it might be quite critical in terms
48,
of where
48
US-Iran relations go.
For 48 or perhaps more, Ellie, let me just get your reaction to the breaking news from Washington. The U.S. president making positive noises, first off, regarding negotiations. He said that there's a substantial possibility of negotiations with Iran, and the White House saying it's now giving itself 2 weeks to decide.
Well, that is breaking news indeed, because I have not been looking at my phone during this discussion.
Good for you.
But look, paying attention to all your guests. But look, I think if the president, there's a big if, doesn't change his mind tomorrow, this will bring with it, I think, a much needed urgent political space to see if we can de-escalate. Now, of course, this 2-week window doesn't mean that there's going to be a ceasefire or halting offensive military action between Israel and Iran. We may have something quite unprecedented, which is that talks between US and Iran move in parallel to Israeli bombardment. That still, unfortunately, leaves your average Iranian in a state of limbo. And I think the concern at the moment, at least from what I'm seeing coming out from the political establishment in Iran, is a real concern that if they do engage in negotiations and cut a deal, will this deal involve a major halt, not just for a week or two, but for a very sustained period of time in Israeli military action. Because I think a worst case scenario for Iran would be to restrict the nuclear program while still giving Israel the freedom of action to navigate above its air in the same way that, for example, Israel is doing in Lebanon in contravention of the ceasefire. So let's give diplomacy a chance and see where that takes us.
Negar Mortazavi, how much faith do you have in the political space that Eli Garanmaya is hoping for there?
So I did check the breaking news. I'm guilty of looking at Twitter right now. And yes, that came from the president. But, looking at past precedent, they had nuclear negotiations scheduled for that Sunday, last Sunday, when the attacks came from the Israelis. It's like two different sort of operation rooms doing their own thing. So does this mean that the president is going to give a 2 weeks notice with attacks or without attacks? That's going to matter a lot, because the message the Iranians have been sending publicly is that if Israel stops, they will stop, and then they will return to negotiations. But while the attacks are coming from the Israelis on the very nuclear program that was going to be negotiated, I don't think they're going to come back to the table. And I agree with Eli, this has only hardened their position. As far as rallying around the flag, I just wanted to add something quickly. When we say rally around the flag, maybe that's a little confusing because it is the regime and the government, but this has created unity in a defense of the homeland. This is I want to distinguish even the government from the land. People's homes within the homeland are being attacked. This is reviving memories of the 1980s, the Iran-Iraq War. I lived in Tehran, grew up through that war. Regime opposition, government, critics went and signed up to go and fight in that war, not because of the government, not in defense of the regime, but to defend the homeland, to defend Iranian cities, Iranian homes, Iranian men, women, and children. And so this has had the effect. And now I'm seeing just regular, ordinary citizens posting videos directed at Netanyahu and saying, Mr. Netanyahu, didn't you say this is a war on Iran's nuclear program? How come my home is bombarded? And then they pan around the camera and showing a destroyed house. So I think that's important to also distinguish, even for people who have no love, lust for the regime. This is an attack on their homeland, on their homes. It's not clear whose home is going to be next, whose family is going to die in the bombing. And that has certainly created a sense of unity, at least among the population.
This rallying around the flag or the homeland, as was just put there by Negar, if there is this 2-week window of opportunity, what happens? Do we go back to the old stalemate after all of this?
Stalemate on the international scale?
Yeah.
So my question is, what happens to the civilians then? For all the people who are chanting death to the dictator, to all the people who were opposing the regime.
Because there was 2009, there was 2019, there was 2022.
And even before 1999, there were many episodes. So my question is, what is going to happen to the civilians? That's the main question, because yes, the Iranian people love their country, but they also hate and have fought the Islamic Republic for years. And one of the catchphrases that comes again and again, especially from the families of the victims of this repression, if you allow me, I will say it first in Farsi, "Doshman ma haminjast," which means our enemy is here inside. And I'm thinking right now about Majid Reza Rahnavard, Pejman Gholipur, all these people who have been killed by the Islamic Republic, all these people who are afraid to simply live under the Islamic Republic of Iran. Right now, the situation is the failure of the international community. They had the occasion to support the civil society, help them open a space of debate where they could build ideas, where they could fund strike funds.
Because these are archive images we're seeing from the 2022, 2023. A lot's happened since.
Yes. A lot happened, and actually during Women Life Freedom, the regime has been destabilized by the protests. And it was during this period that the international community should have used all the levers of the international law that exist. They should have put targeted sanctions on the heads of the regime instead of making the population suffer. They should have updated the sanctions that for most of them were not efficient anymore. They should have, like I said, helped the strikes right before the bombing by Israel. We were following the third week of strike by the workers in Iran. And why didn't they help then? Where was the international community then? So my only focus as an activist for human rights is the civilians. What is going to happen to them? Because they make deals and people die.
Rohan Malvandi, they make deals and people die. We had a panelist earlier this week stating that if there is some kind of a power vacuum, it doesn't mean that a Western-style democracy follows.
Well, nobody knows, I think, exactly what would follow. The worst-case scenarios are ones where Iran turns into something like what transpired in Syria or Iraq or Libya, God forbid. The best-case scenarios are a transition to some kind of secular democratic Iran. But the reality is that the people with the power in Iran at the moment are the Revolutionary Guards. And the chances are that in a chaotic situation, they are the ones who will seize power. I think what the hardliners in Iran and the hardliners in Washington and Jerusalem have ensured is that instead of Iran going in the direction of something more democratic, something more open to the world, they are taking Iran step by step down the road towards something resembling North Korea.
Because here's the question on this point, and it harks back to what we heard earlier from Nagar, which is Benjamin Netanyahu has been accused of prolonging the conflict in Gaza because if the war ends, then he has to answer to security failings that happened at the outset. If the war ends now between Israel and Iran, is that bad for the regime? Is the bad for the regime as well? Does the regime want the war to stop or to continue?
I think the regime wants the war to stop. I mean, they are in a very desperate situation. There are no good outcomes from this, as far as I can see, for anyone. Not from the Israeli perspective and not from the Iranian perspective. I mean, it's not possible to change a regime from the air. It's also not possible to completely destroy the Iranian nuclear program just with airstrikes. Certainly Israel can't do it unilaterally, and it's questionable whether they can even do it if the Americans help them. The Iranians will rebuild the nuclear program. In fact, I would argue any Iranian regime, even one that is a successor regime to the Islamic Republic, will build a nuclear program because Iran is a major actor in the Middle East. It's a country of 90 million people, 3 times the size of France, with the world's second largest natural gas reserves and third largest oil reserves. And if anything, Netanyahu has demonstrated that if Iran, under any regime, wants to play a major role in the region, it has to contend with Israel as the only undeclared nuclear state in the region, and it will need a nuclear shield of some kind to stand behind when it wants to pursue its interests. So I'm sorry to say that this decision by Netanyahu is a fatally flawed one and is going to, in the long run, harm not only Iran, but I think also Israel.
In the Eli Geran-Maye, it's in the long run, Iran will nonetheless get the bomb?
Look, it is true that if you are placing Iran in a existential threat position, as has been done, I think, right now by Israel, there is already open debate now erupting within the political establishment that Iran's supreme leader made a mistake in issuing the fatwa and the nuclear doctrine against weaponization, that if anything, the example of North Korea shows that President Trump would have respected Iran more had it weaponized by this stage, and would have never dared to suggest that Iran should unconditionally surrender. And that essentially Israel, as your previous guest mentioned, is the Middle East's only state which has a significant nuclear weapons arsenal, that there needs to be a counterbalance to Israel to create that regional balance of power. Now, for now, we are not seeing intelligence from Western governments or the International Atomic Energy Agency that at least pre these strikes, Iran had made the political decision to head towards weaponization. But this attack will have a deep bearing on the calculations of the leadership going forward. But as I said, if there is a window, and I think we have it right now, to have a nuclear deal that creates significant restraints on Iran's nuclear program, we can at least buy time and breathing room before that decision is made. And who knows? Let me finish here. But who knows? In 10, 20 years' time, what kind of a system of government or rule is in place in Iran, and their decisions may be calculated differently.
All right, a window of opportunity, at least to de-escalate, you see there. We'll have to leave it there. Eli Geranmai, I want to thank you for joining us from London. Same with Roham Alvandi, Negar Mortazavi in Washington. Kian Habibian, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.